Keep these men digging, Captain. Let's be done with this by nightfall.
Yes, sir.
Ulysses S. Grant has now gone down the Mississippi River. He's in the midst of the Vicksburg campaign. In 17 days, Grant's army marched 200 miles and won 5 battles. And now, we are talking about a siege.
When Grant first settles into siege operations, he digs a line opposite the Confederate ones, so you can cut off the key routes of supply to the city. And then in case a Confederate force came from his rear, he then dug another series of entrenchments facing the other way.
And now he's gonna ring Vicksburg with artillery. In fact, he's even gonna bring naval artillery off naval ships to bombard Vicksburg. We wanna put them under the maximum pressure so that they recognize this sacrifice is no longer worth it.
The primary strategy of any siege is isolating the people you are besieging inside, causing them to use up both their military resources, but especially their food, to force them to capitulate. So the consequence of this is Grant's army will grow to over 70,000 troops over time, and it's a ratcheting up of military pressure.
Now, the Confederate government in Richmond is rather concerned about the situation at Vicksburg. And there has emerged a group that believes that less focus needs to be placed on the East, where things are going well, and more focus needs to be put on the West, where things are not going well. Robert E. Lee's response is, even if I send troops to Vicksburg, by the time they got there, it might be over. And Lee decides to go north and try to seek a decisive engagement with the Federals north of Pennsylvania. At the same time, Grant keeps the pressure up at Vicksburg to end the siege.
By the end of June, the Confederate Army of Vicksburg was subsisting on a handful of peas and rice issued once a day per man. Even their water would be rationed to 1 cup per man per day.
So now, as the temperature of the summer continues to get hotter and hotter, Grant will dam up all the creeks that are going in there. Confederates are being shelled by Union gunboats as well as Union batteries.
But also throughout the siege, you have a civilian population trapped in the city, estimated at about 2,000. And the citizens lived underground in man-made caves to escape the constant bombardment of Union cannon and heavy mortar. And about the only time they came out of these caves is when the Union artillerymen ate their morning, noon, and evening meals.
Grant knows full well the suffering of the civilians in Vicksburg. He doesn't relish any of it, but I think he does believe, without breaking the will of the Southern people, that this war is not going to come to an end.
These civilians at Vicksburg, who weeks earlier were able to get all the food they needed, were clearly starving. And they started eating anything that moved, rats included. And by early July, it was clear that the Confederates were near the end of their rope.
On July 3rd, 2 persons were seen coming towards our lines bearing a white flag. It was a glorious sight to soldiers on the line.
And on the hot afternoon of July 3rd, at the very same time Pickett's legions were storming over the stone wall at Gettysburg, the Confederate commander, John Pemberton, would ask Grant on what terms he would receive the surrender of the city.
General Pemberton.
Your terms, General, surprise me. I propose...
No proposals. Terms won't change. Unconditional surrender.
Sir.
Listen, we need to offer terms.
No.
Be practical. What are we going to do with 30,000 prisoners? Better offer terms. What do you think? General?
I'm prepared to accept the parole, but only if my men walk away with all of their personal property.
By personal property, do you mean to include slaves? Sidearms, horses, no slaves. No slaves leave with you. You have until 10 o'clock tonight. Then we attack the city.
Up to this point, Grant's reputation is unconditional surrender Grant. And yet here he paroles the men that are there. And it shows what flexibility of mind he had. I think he makes the calculus of, what if we send these 30,000 scarecrows back to their towns? What are they going to tell them? We just got whipped.
See the corporal beside your parole card.
General Grant.
Retain your sidearms, General.
The enemy had been suffering, particularly towards the last. I saw our men taking bread from their haversacks and giving it to the enemy they had so recently been engaged in starving out.
Grant doesn't have a hatred of Southern people. He sees them as Americans that have gone astray. He doesn't agree with their cause, but he cares for the people themselves. That really colors the way he deals with the Confederates throughout the Civil War.
Vicksburg surrenders, and the Mississippi is open. And as Lincoln says, the Father of waters flows again, unvexed, to the sea. And the great thing is that the news comes to him the same weekend as the news of the victory at Gettysburg.
My dear General, when you first reached the vicinity of Vicksburg, I never had any faith except a general hope that the expedition could succeed. I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln.
Grant and Lincoln first meet as correspondents. And their correspondence is quite wonderful. They are both men of the West. And I think they share a certain philosophy and perhaps a certain attitude. And I think it really set the terms for their future relationship. This victory was a culmination of a very long campaign, full of trial and error, full of Grant figuring out, how do I capture what seemed an impregnable fort?
The Vicksburg campaign has been studied by military professionals ever since July of 1863. In fact, in the Army's warfighting manual, it highlights the Vicksburg campaign as the most brilliant campaign ever waged on American soil. And so whereas the Civil War is often referred to as the last of the old wars, first of the modern wars, Grant can be termed the first modern American warrior.